We have a new sponsor on the podcast, folks. It's QUANT Wrestling. Super pleased to be working with these folks. They provide analytics on the sport of wrestling, something that's desperately needed in our great sport. QUANT does this by tracking over 550 analytics throughout a match and can provide different outcomes such as how long between the time a guy shoots to when he finishes. How often does David Carr start a period on top and end a period on top? QUANT can also predict with 82% accuracy match outcomes at the Division I level. You can see all of this data in the QUANT app, which is available in the Apple App Store as well as the Google Play Store. There are two versions of the app: the Division I app, where QUANT is tracking all of their data points on Division I wrestlers on your behalf. Then they also have a youth and high school app where parents and wrestlers watch their matches and input the data into the QUANT app, and QUANT does all the analytics on the back end. The QUANT Wrestling apps are available in the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. That's QUANT, Q-U-A-N-T, Q-U-A-N-T. The first 2 weeks are free, but if you use the discount code WCML, you'll get an additional 2 weeks for free. That's QUANT Wrestling, a new sponsor here on Wrestling Changed My Life. Now let's get to the show.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestled, because if you wrestled, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
You know, if I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Wrestling Changed My Life podcast presented by QUANT Wrestling. Download the QUANT Wrestling app in the Apple and Google Play Store, QUANT. Use the discount code WCML for 2 weeks free. Our guest today is UFC and MMA legend Jon Fitch. Jon is one of the pioneers in MMA, a career he embarked on after wrestling at Purdue where he was a walk-on, and now Jon is one of the most respected and legendary UFC fighters of all time. It was an honor to have Jon Fitch on the podcast. Please consider checking out Jon's book, The Weight Cut Bible, Learn How an MMA Fighter Loses 30 Pounds in 8 Weeks, as well as his book, Failing Upward, Death by the Ego. 2 books Jon has recently authored. He also has a website where you can find all the information about his podcast, Jon Fitch Knows Nothing. You can find his website, jonfitch.net. Fan of the week goes to our good friend Terry Paulson. That's at the champion MS on Twitter. A husband, a father, a friend, and a patriotic American citizen. God bless you, Terry Paulson. Thank you so much for your support of the podcast. Now let's get to the episode with the great Jon Fitch. Awesome. Jon Fitch, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Good to be here, man.
Yes, sir.
One of my longtime listeners told me to reach out to you, and he's an avid listener of your podcast.
Yeah, no, it's so cool that he did that. I'm glad we're here, and we're going to talk a little bit of life, a little bit of wrestling, a little bit of UFC. Let's start here, man. You get to Purdue as a freshman, and you decide to walk on the wrestling team. How did this idea to kind of make that leap to the D1 level germinate, and how did it go from there?
I spent my entire childhood thinking that I was going to play pro football. So I started playing in the 4th grade, contact PAL football. Like I spent my summers like always practicing and doing whatever. I started wrestling in 4th grade also, but wrestling was like I was super competitive, and it was just a way to just like to battle with people. So it was like my way of like getting that fight out. And it was always the number 2 sport for me. Like I prioritized football first. But yeah, I my freshman year of high school, I weighed about 168 pounds. And instead of cutting the 3 pounds and wrestling 165, where I would have beat the guy in the spot, I wrestled up at 171 because I didn't want to lose weight because I was supposed to play football, you know. And then yeah, I had a senior ahead of me that year, so like I kind of screwed myself a little bit, but whatever. And you know, when my senior year came around of high school, like I wasn't getting, you know, letters and knocks on the door to come play football. I had little interest in small schools, but I didn't want to compete at a small school. You know, I wanted to go to a D1 school to compete. And I kind of had to make the decision. I was like, well, do I walk on to the football team, a D1 football team, and maybe get cut, maybe get laughed off the field, maybe work my ass off and I play kickoff team my senior year? Or do I walk on to a D1 wrestling team and potentially have an opportunity to win a national title? And I was like, you know, I'd rather do the hard work and try to win the wrestling title.
And did anyone fight you on this? Like any of your friends or family? They say, hey, you're crazy.
No.
That they were all in support of it?
No, nobody fought me on it. You know, my mother, of course, questioned a few times. She's like, you know, you don't need to do this. You don't need to wrestle, because she would come and visit and face would be beat up, or I have cauliflower ear starting or whatever. She's like, we don't need to do this. You don't have to wrestle. You don't have to earn a scholarship. Like, I was like, no, Mom, this is what I want to do. This is why I'm here.
So were you always just someone who dreamed big and thought about being on the big stage, like D1 football or Big Ten wrestling? And if so, like, who were some of your early sports idols?
Like Dick Butkus. I always loved Dick Butkus.
Heck yeah.
You know, like I was around, you know, my childhood was like the 86 Bears and, you know, those guys. So Mike Singletary, we used to love the old like Steelers linebackers and whatever from, you know, the Iron Curtain guys. And, you know, it was the middle linebackers that I really liked. And that was the position that I played. And I thought it was the coolest one, because I got to run the defense. Like I told everyone what to do. And then like, I got to read the plays and like talk to the quarterback. And it was just, you're like the quarterback of the defense kind of. And that was just, you know, once I found that position in junior high, I really started falling in love with it, because before I was like nose tackle in grade school and whatever. And that was just because I was fast and I would mess with the linemen and I would get past them easy. It wasn't like I was powering through them. I'd line up pointing one direction, then run the other direction, and they would have no idea where I went.
And was football like a big thing in your town, like Friday Night Lights type of deal?
Not on that level. Certain schools definitely had big showings, you know, but we had wrestling teams in the area too. Belmont High School was one of the teams in our area, in our conference, that, you know, they sold out their basketball stadiums, like when it was, when they had big matches against a big team or whatever.
And so you kind of have this dream of greater things. You get to Purdue. Talk us through like the first couple months transitioning into the team.
It was a lot of fun. I had too much fun my freshman year. I think my first 2 years were, I think, too much fun. It wasn't until my third year, which is my sophomore year of eligibility, that I got like my ass just handed to me. And I was like, okay, I need to make a lot of changes, because I was working hard during the season, you know, and I did the summer workouts and stuff like that, but it wasn't like a serious commitment that like the top guys would make, you know, the guys that like Kel Sanderson type level, you know, those guys were in season 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through their entire college career.
And what was the turning point that flipped it for you? You said took a pretty hard loss, or?
Yeah, I had a bad season. It was my first year at I think it was 172, I think was the weight. So it was the first year I had to really like cut and maintain weight, because I was always wrestling up in high school. I did my redshirt year at Purdue at 180, 184, I think. And like it wasn't hard to make, and it was like we only did the unattached tournaments, so it was like you had like weeks to prepare for that one match. And then my first year of eligibility, my freshman year of eligibility, the senior quit at 197. So me and another freshman, battled to fight at 197. So we didn't, we were both 10 pounds underweight. So, I got some varsity time. I think I even lettered that year, but no, I think I lettered 3 years, but like, I got experience, I got to travel around, but I didn't have to make weight. And then that first year I had to make weight. I didn't do it right. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I was wrestling a lot of big guys in the Big Ten. I wrestled 17 guys that year that were ranked in the top 20.
Bro, that Big Ten grind, like in January, February, is ruthless.
Yes, it was bad, and it's just, so like I was struggling with that stuff, and just, I was wrestling with tough guys too. I wasn't like they're scrubs, but yeah, I won 8 matches and I lost 31.
Bro,
Yeah.
that can either make or break you. And obviously it was a big inflection point for you. Like, what changed after that?
It was the make it or break it. I was like, shit or get off the pot moment. Excuse me. But it's like, what the hell are you doing here? It's like, you're not getting the most out of wrestling because you're goofing around too much in the off season, and you're one of the most serious guys on the team. But just because you're the most serious guy on the team doesn't mean that like you compare to the guys who are at the top level on other teams. Cause we were, middle of the pack at Purdue in the Big Ten, which is still top 25 in the country. But, that those top 10 teams, they're killers. And if you're not getting after it every single day, like you're not going to compete. So, I had to switch that mentality. And I think I was reading, I read something about Sanderson, Kale, and what his schedule looked like and what he did. And it was just like school, workout, a little bit of girlfriend time, family, and then that was it. I was like, okay, so like no bars, he's not chasing girls. He's got one at home. Yeah, like just the amount of time that I was kind of wasting, because it's like, suck it up and do the wrestling thing and do it all out, or stop and go have fun and actually, have an opportunity to actually chase girls around. Cause a wrestling season, cause I trained hard during the wrestling season, but it was like the beginning and the end of the year and the summer that it was a little kind of, I was lifting and stuff and drilling a little bit, but it was not the same as like the last 3 years where I really cranked it up.
So at that point, were you just all consumed, training 12 months a year type of deal?
Pretty much. Like it was, I still had fun. I still had my weekends to have fun, but like I was not going out 4 nights a week. I was, wrestling hard on the weekdays, when it wasn't time, when we weren't in season, because that's a big part of it. Some guys, they'll drill once a week, but they're not getting after it once or twice a week. You get after it once or twice a week and then drill, 3 to 4 times a week. Like it just needs to be a regular thing you're doing all the time. And, I started doing that more towards the end, and things started turning around.
In your senior year, like talk us through some of the highlights there. Like a 21-5 record. It looked like something like that.
I think it was 20 something, and I can't even remember, but it might have been 14, but Big Ten is pretty good. Highlights were, I beat a ranked guy who's like ranked like 17th at it was like I can't remember what the name of that tournament was. It's in like at Slippery Rock, and it's up in Pennsylvania. Matttown, is it Matttown?
Yeah.
Maybe it was Matttown. Yeah, I think I placed, but I placed at a few things. I got like 4th and 3rd at a few tournaments. I had a 1-point close match with the guy who was ranked number 2 at the time. I didn't even know it. The coaches didn't tell me until afterwards. We were at a tournament, and they're like, "You know who that guy was?" I was like, "No."
And was Tom Erickson coaching there then?
Tom was coaching there, and that's why one of the reasons that was the biggest reason I got into fighting, because Tom was around, and then I got exposed to that environment a little bit. It was kind of an alien thing to me, because I watched some of the earlier stuff in like 93, 94, but then when it started becoming easily available to watch on the pay-per-views, because we didn't have the internet really back then.
Right.
And yeah, so I had like a big gap of watching fights, and then I met Tom, and Tom was great, man, because he was just a huge 300-pound man, 6'3", 300 pounds, super quick, agile, and it's a loud, booming voice, and you get that guy yelling in your corner. It's always nice.
The big cat, baby.
Big cat. Yeah.
Dude, tell us about just some of your early stories or early interactions with Tom Erickson and kind of him exposing you to fighting.
Well, he used to have guys come into town and train with him. So Mark Holman, who
wow,
first heavyweight champ for the UFC, also Ohio State champ, national champ. He would come into town. He brought one of his guys, his big tall guy, I can't remember his name, Wes Sims. That's it. Wes would come with him. Ian Freeman was an English fighter. I think he beat like Frank Mir a long time ago. And he came out to learn a little wrestling, because they don't have any wrestling in England.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gary Goodrich would come down, and Tom fought Gary once, and then they became friends, and they started working together. Tom would learn to stand up from Gary, and Gary would learn some wrestling from him. And, working with those guys kind of opened my eyes up, because like, especially like when I was working with Gary, because Gary didn't have any wrestling, and I was like, this guy's making a lot of money per fight. I was like, I can take him down pretty easy. And like, when I take him down, there's nothing he can do. I was like, I was like, this is interesting. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I could try this too. Who knows? And then I just kept doing those workouts, because there were something else to do to lose weight, stay in shape, the off season stuff. I could get into the gym and get a workout in and learn something, and not have the monotonous, like regular day in, day out, same thing workout.
And so those workouts were going on at Purdue at the time, like all those legends?
They would come in, down into the wrestling room, and, after practice or whatever, they would come and have their own little workout or whatever. And so a few guys would get to come in and work who were interested. They might even come in. Gary might have come into a couple practices to wrestle, like with the heavyweights, and get, in shape and pushed around and stuff.
And were those guys fighting in UFC or Pride back then?
They were fighting in Pride at the time.
God, those are legendary stories, man.
Yeah, that was like 2000. That was right around the time Coleman won that Grand Prix at the time. It's right around that time. But yeah, I mean, like, technically Coleman was my first, you didn't even remember this, but he was my first jiu-jitsu instructor.
Really?
He was the first guy that was like teaching me. I remember he was trying to teach me a triangle, and he was like, or trying to teach me how to open the guard or do something. And like, I was trying to do it, and he's like, nope, you're too weak. You're just too weak. I was like, there's no like technical like correction. It's like, you just can't do that one.
You're just too weak. Dude, so you were one of like the early jiu-jitsu practitioners even. I mean, you think about back in that 2000, 2001 era, not many dudes were practicing Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
No. Well, like, that's the thing. We didn't have jiu-jitsu anywhere. Like, people who said they knew jiu-jitsu, they were just talking off their ass. They were a judo club. We had some friends on the judo club. So they had some groundwork and whatever. So like, we had DVDs, and not even DVDs, we had VHS tapes. We had VHS tapes and other fights. And then, we would try to figure things out, and then we would try them with the judo guys, and, we would work on their groundwork together and that stuff. But it was like, it was terrible. It was hard. That's like one of the reasons why I moved from Indiana after that year of grad school. I moved from Indiana to California, because there just wasn't anywhere to train really. And I didn't even start putting the gi on until like I had been out in California for a year already, because I was like, we don't fight in a gi. I'm not going to put the gi on. I don't see the point. I don't want to do that sport. But I would go to the practice without my gi on, and I would work with people and not do the grips. But then Dave Camarillo came, and we went no gi one day. He came to our team practice, and he got on top, and like I could not get him off me. He was like 160 pounds dripping wet, and
Wow.
I could not get up. And like in a 5-minute round, I wasn't able to get up. He was like just focusing on controlling and staying on top. And I think he was trying to prove a point. And he did, because I was like, okay, if there's something to this, if this little guy can keep me on the mat, you know, like nobody else in here, the heavyweights can't keep me down. Like I'm getting up. So I went and got a gi and put one on, and then I was his first white to black belt.
Wow. How long did that? What was that progression?
It was fast for me. Like by IBJJF standards, it's not legal now because they have new rules. But it was only a 4.5-year process for me.
Wow.
From when I first started putting on the gi and training gi like all the time. But you know, it's cheating because I had a year of fighting, or 2 years of fighting already, and or a year and a half, 2 years of fighting already, and wrestling for, you know, since I was 9. So it wasn't like I was starting from zero.
Dude, is there anything more humble than going to jiu-jitsu and just seeing some of these guys that look like coders or like chess players, but they're just masters in jiu-jitsu? It's crazy how effective it is.
Yeah. Yep.
So what was like the jumping off point to where you were thinking about doing MMA to when you like had your first fight?
I think my senior year of wrestling, my senior year of college, because, you know, I had to do my observation stuff. I was studying to do become a teacher. So first semester you have to do observation, second semester is student teaching. So I did my observation stuff, and then like pretty early on, I just didn't like the vibe and the feel I was getting from the schools and school systems, and how the teachers were enjoying their jobs, and the kids, and just, you know, the rules and the way things were shaping up. Just, it didn't sit right well with me, you know, like it didn't seem like the teachers had any real authority over their curriculum or what they were teaching. The lessons all seemed like just basic, stupid memorization stuff. They weren't actually learning anything or critically thinking through anything. The PE classes were stupid activities that the kids didn't want to do, they didn't want to learn, and the teachers didn't want to teach. So it just seemed like a lot of just wasted energy and space. And I was like, I don't want to get sucked into this, you know? And I started thinking, well, you know, like I still want to compete, you know, that was a big part of it, was like, I just still wanted to compete. And I had missed half of my junior year because I tore up not meniscus, but my MCL, which one was it? PCL, posterior cruciate ligament, the one that doesn't need the surgery. I tore that, so I missed half the season, and I couldn't get like the medical red shirt because I had wrestled too much. So I was like, I'm just starting to get good. Like my junior year, I had a winning season. You know, senior year, it was starting off good. I was looking good, and I was just like, I don't want to not compete. Like, I don't want to graduate and then go start working and then not compete anymore. So I started thinking, it's like, well, what can I do to compete? And there was 3 things that I was looking at. One was these, like, they're kind of new at the time, but they're like these geo races where like you like run for a long time in the mud and you bike for a long time. And you climb some shit. Like I was like, this could be fun. Maybe I could do that. Maybe that'll be my thing that I do. Then I was thinking about, you know, maybe I should just keep wrestling and try to make a national team or Olympic team or something like that, and just see what happens there. And then I was like, third, well, I guess I could try the fighting thing that Tom's doing. It's like, and then as the year went on and progressed, I had little things that happened that made me realize that certain things wouldn't work. Like the geo racing things, like hell of expensive just to afford the equipment to be able to do it, to practice. I was like, well, you know, maybe some other time. The wrestling, we had upperclassman named Tim Derlin who came back, and he had been spending his time doing that, trying to make a national team since he graduated. He was a senior when I was a red shirt, and so like 4 years later, he's still broke. his like body's broken, beat up. He had his ears were all messed up. He had just gotten back from one of the tournaments, and it was like his best tournament. He still only got like 6th place or something.
Yeah.
And he's like getting married, and they're gonna have to live in his mom's basement. And I was just like, man, I was like, that's brutal. I was like, he's so beat up. Yeah, he's like, he's worked. I know he's like a super hard worker, and he's a super nice guy, and he works hard at everything. And I was like, man, like that's a struggle. I was like, I don't know if I want to struggle that much and not have anything to show for it, like right away. I was like, I could try the fighting thing, and these guys at least get paid. So, that kind of started shaping my mind up towards, that's what I'm going to do when I graduate. I'm going to go fight. And then I graduated that summer, and I fought, I think in like July. It was the first fight. It was July.
Bro, what did people say in that era when you said you were going to be an MMA fighter? What was the look that you got?
That was the thing though. I was like, nobody knew what it was.
Like they had no idea.
Yeah, I'm going to fight no holds barred. I'm going to fight MMA. I'm going to fight in a cage. You're like, what? Like, that UFC stuff? You ever seen the guys in the cage? You're like, what? Like, you have to explain it to them. And because the internet still wasn't that developed then, it wasn't like I could pull out Google and Google it and show it to anybody. But yeah, I fought for 3 years before I like told my parents.
Wow.
Because I was like, how am I going to explain this? I was like, yeah, Mom, I'm not going to get a job with my college degree. I'm going to go fight people in a cage all over the world for hundreds of dollars.
So how'd you say, like, what was the reason you told them they moved to California?
Well, I didn't have any student loans. I didn't have any debt. I had a little bit of money, and I was like, I'm just going to go to California because I want to go to California. And I told them I found a gym, which is semi-true, that was going to let me teach wrestling classes out of, and I was going to make money teaching wrestling classes and train at the gym, and then just experience California for a little bit. And they're like, all right, kind. It's kind of like my, I graduate college, and then I go backpacking in Europe for a year or something. I'm gonna go teaching wrestling in California for a year, see what happens.
I mean, the fact that you could fight for that long without having your parents know just shows you how underground it was. I mean, and when people say those were the dark days of MMA and UFC, I mean, what was it like going to some of those early smoker fights, and just like, what were the conditions?
So I fought 7 times before I'd ever sparred a round.
What? That's crazy. So you just get in there and go for it.
I didn't. Yeah, I was just like, I didn't know. We didn't have a ring and everybody spar with, didn't have equipment. So we're just like, it's a fight. I just, just go in and throw. It didn't work out that well. The first one, especially. But yeah, so, I didn't show up to the first fight with the cup because I thought it was like wrestling, wrestle with a cup. I didn't have a coach or corners with me. I thought it was like a wrestling tournament or something you just showed up to. I had maybe 14 fights, 13 fights before I'd ever signed a contract. It was just like word of mouth or, phone call. Somebody talked to somebody and set it up. And there was times when we would drive. Me and Brian Ebersol, we drove from Indiana, Illinois over to Iowa and Minnesota, and we were just like looking for fights. We were just seeing if the promoter had anybody for us. And they're like, yeah, we got somebody for you. They had us weigh in on a scale in their hotel bathroom. And then I didn't even see the guy until like they're announcing us in the ring.
Dude, it's just it's hard to believe, but it's not, because I grew up near the Militich fighting system, and my second cousin, Steve Rusk, who was big with Tim Sylvia back then, and that whole system. So I would go in and teach wrestling on Saturdays. Well, I did 5 fights, and the amateur fights were at a strip club on Thursdays, where if you fought, you got in the strip club for free. It was called Amsterdam's in Davenport. And that was our way to just get in the strip club for free back then. And we had 5 amateur fights. It was like ridiculous.
And so $5 on the cover.
Right. Exactly. So how long were you doing these kind of things before you moved to California?
I freaking cornered a guy in somewhere in Indiana, I think maybe. And it was like a handmade ring, like with ropes and duct tape and 2x4s and shit on the ground in the bar. Right. It wasn't, it was probably, they couldn't have fit 250 people in that place. And it was just in the dance floor was the ring. And one of the guys I was cornering, like we're up there and he's smoking a cigarette in the back with everybody warming up. I'm just like, what is going on?
Dang.
And the other guy that I was there to corner with, like, he like changed it from a fight into a grappling match. Like, you know, why they're in the back. Like, oh yeah, I don't want to throw punches. Can we just have a grappling match? And yeah, man, that was wild. Wild times. Like you could go and guys brought their own small gloves to wear.
Yeah.
Guys would fight once and then let their buddy borrow the gloves to fight with. You know, you could have 3 guys wearing the same pair of gloves in the same night. You'd have events where there was, 20, 30 fights and you're fighting until 3 a.m. You know, there were fights where I've seen guys wrap their knuckles with duct tape. Like they wrap their hands with duct tape, put the glove on, and because there's no commission, there's nobody overlooking anything. I fought in Chicago once and there's no oversight. So like the promoter didn't put the pay for the fighters in an escrow. He was assuming that he was going to make enough at the door that he would be able to pay everybody out. Well, like that didn't happen. Nobody showed up. So like he didn't have the money to pay anybody, wrote a bunch of bad checks.
I was going to say, how often did you fight and not get paid back then?
Me only once, but it was not that uncommon.
Yeah.
There were times when, yeah, guys would get home and their checks wouldn't be good. A lot of guys would sit around and wait till like 2 or 3 hours later to see if they get cash from the guy. You know, it's like, give me the concessions cash, give me whatever. It's like, I'll take $100 less, just give me cash. Yeah.
Wild days. So how long were you fighting before you decided to move to San Jose and join AKA?
I fought basically a little over a year. It's like that was about a year. So I graduated 2002 and I won a scholarship that paid for a year of grad school. So I got my tuition paid for and then I got room and board. So I got like a $3,000 check at the beginning of each semester.
Nice.
So like I was living large. I was living large that year, at least at the beginning of the school year or the beginning of the semesters. But yeah, I took a light load and I worked with the wrestling team and I started fighting, traveling around. I fought in Mexico. Yeah, that was a crazy trip because like we went down somewhere, landed at a border town. I got into a car with 3 Mexican people I'd never met before, and they drove me to Monterey.
Dude.
like they spoke a little bit of English, but like thinking about it now, like I had no idea what I was like. I didn't know those people. I didn't know any cars in front of us, behind us. Like we were just driving like endless nothing for like hours. And it was like, okay.
See, those could have been cartel people. You have no idea.
100%. Could have been cartel, but I was like, I'm broke. Where are they going to get money from me?
Right. So who did you live with when you went to AKA? And were like some of the elite guys we know now training there, or was it in the early stages?
It was early stages. Like Josh Thompson was there. Bobby Southworth was there. Trevor Pringley was coming to town regularly at that time. I guess BJ had already left. He was there for a little bit before I got there.
Mm-hmm.
Frank was around a little bit, but it was like on his way out, started doing his own thing. Mike Swick was there already. But yeah, when I moved out, see, that's a funny story too. It's like, I just found a house on Craigslist. I was finding houses to rent on Craigslist that were close to the gym. So like I found a bunch of houses that were like a mile away. And then only one allowed dogs. They didn't care if I had a dog. So that was the winner. And like I scheduled it. I sent my deposit. I never talked on the phone with these people. I'd never seen a picture of them. Never seen a picture of the house. I just had an address and they told me I had a room. So yeah, I showed up. Everything worked out. But that could have been a scam too.
Dude, so many of these things could have been missteps, and it all worked out. Like, did the guys who you mentioned, did they know you were coming, or did you just show up one day?
No, like I had the guy who was running the household and taking the payments or whatever. He put the ad up, so I was corresponding with him back and forth. But like once I mean, like I don't need to. Like once I set a date, like I'm coming on this day. Here's the deposit. I'll see you. Like, that means I'm going to be there on that day. And he's like, I didn't know if you're going to show up. you said you were, but like, yeah, I showed up and he was kind of surprised because he thought I would have like wanted more info. But like I was just so focused on like just being out there and getting started. Like I didn't really care.
Talk us through some of the early fights you had with the UFC and what that organization was like.
Oh man, it was cool at the beginning. Like I never liked Dana. I never liked the way Dana treated fighters. I don't think he should ever be talking down or disrespecting your athletes in any way like that, especially when they don't work for you. Like you're technically supposed to work for them.
How often did that happen?
What's that?
Like talking down on fighters and that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, you always see it in the news.
Yeah.
And it's always because there's a contract issue, or it's usually because they offered a guy a title fight for crap money or crap circumstances. And they're like, no, I would like this. And they're like, oh, I guess you don't want it. And then they'll go publicly and be like, no, this guy isn't tough. He doesn't want it. They try to goad you into selling yourself short. But yeah, in the beginning, there was and that was the thing they were pushing. It's like, we're all in this together. We're all a team. We're all family, trying to get everybody to work together, make sacrifices to help build the company. But at the end of the day, like they're not taking care of the fighters in the back end, like the guys who help build the company. Like they're not looking out for those guys at all.
And is that some of the things you guys are fighting in that antitrust lawsuit that you're involved with?
Partly it's the conflict of interests that are there, and the monopoly that they've been able to form because of the conflict of interest. Having control of exclusive contracts and controlling the titles and the ranks, it's just such a conflict of interest. Like it's impossible for anybody, not just the fighters, to compete freely, but it's impossible for other promoters to compete freely because you just don't have access to the top guys.
You don't really see that in other sports either. Like that kind of like.
That's because they have free agency. And it's like it's illegal. Like no sporting organization anywhere will have a setup like that. You will never see the title controlled by the people controlling the contracts. It doesn't happen. Like the NFL, right? The NFL controls the NFL football trophy. The promoters don't. The promoter would be the equivalent of the teams.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the owners of the Raiders, they're a promotion, right? So like they don't control rank, they don't control the title, but they do control exclusive contracts with their athletes.
And look how much power they have with the NFL Players Association.
Yes,
like that's a force to be reckoned with.
Yes,
like,
100%.
Do fighters have any kind of organization like that?
We have the Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association. We've been around for over 10 years. We're fighting and doing a lot of stuff on the ground, but it's just hard to get guys to see something that doesn't exist yet, because the argument is, oh, you're going to make it like boxing. And then there's never a good argument why it shouldn't be like that, other than I don't like it. But, you're talking about free agency. You're talking about fighters having the ownership of their rank that they earned, ownership of their title. Like it shouldn't matter what promotion you're with. If you're the second best guy in the world, you're the second best guy in the world. You should have the right to compete against the number one guy in the world.
Right.
Regardless of promotion.
And even if the UFC is perceived as being more popular than boxing now, boxing may even be making more than UFC fighters.
It's not though. There's a perception that UFC is more popular, but it's not. They don't do higher viewership than all of boxing.
Really?
All of boxing is global. No, it's not even close.
And
like
who
UFC
makes more, boxers or UFC fighters?
Boxers make more money on every level.
Really?
You'll see the argument that this is the stupidest argument. They're like, oh, well, UFC has guys, their first fight in the UFC is 10-10, 10 to show, 10 to win. And you have guys on the undercard of Mayweather or one of the other guys. Who's the other guy that's popular right now? Or whatever. You'll have a guy on the undercard of Gypsy King's fight, the heavyweights, and they'll only make, $1,500, $3,000. But it's that guy's second or third fight. Like his notoriety only generates that much money for him. The person who's fighting in the UFC, that's not their first fight usually. it's like their fifth or sixth, seventh fight, maybe their 10th fight. They've had a bunch of fights already. Look to see how many fights the guys had on the undercards of the other fights. Like they try to compare the wrong things and complain about the wrong things to screw people up. They're like,
10
oh,
and
well,
10
the
isn't
baseline.
shit.
What's that?
10 and 10.
10 is anything, especially in these guys. They're not fighting guaranteed 3 or 4 times a year. They're fighting once or maybe twice, and then you're paying out, that's 10, that's before taxes. So you're going to pay a big chunk of that's taxes. And then you're going to pay, another 15 to 20% to coaches and managers. Then you got to pay for your food. You got to pay for supplements. You got to pay for massages, a lot of the stuff you can write off. But still, like you're not walking away with a ton of money.
How big was the Reebok deal in terms of fighter income and that whole situation?
Awful. Because the guys at the highest level were making, the guys at the championship level were making $45,000 per fight for wearing that. When Chuck Liddell back in the day was making 20 grand per patch.
Damn.
So you have guys making $100,000 to $500,000 on sponsorships for the fight. Like UFC consolidating into one person, and it's a grift. And they purposely did that. Guys were making good money back 2008, 2009, and then they started charging the sponsors money to sponsor the athletes. So if someone wanted to sponsor me, they had to pay the UFC $50,000 to $100,000 first, and then they could sponsor me.
Oof.
Most companies can't afford that. Like before, you had mom and pop shops who would sponsor 2 or 3, 4 guys, and they could swing that budget. They could swing the $15,000 to $50,000 a year, paying those guys for those fights, and that's a lot of money to those fighters. And those fighters would have a few sources of income like that. I used to be able to easily make my show money and sponsorship back then just from those sponsors. So I was making 50 to 60 grand, through sponsors. Like that's already over the amount that the Reebok champions are making.
And in one day that was just gone?
Yeah, like it got squeezed out over time. At first they started taking 50,000. And then after a little bit longer, it started to be 100,000. And then companies started pulling out and be like, we just can't. There's not enough eyeballs on this to justify the $100,000. So they chased out a lot of the sponsors. They chased out the market. And then there was only some slime balls left. And then a couple of them missed some payments. And then now it's easy for them to villainize sponsors. Look how terrible you fighters have it. Look how shitty these sponsors are. They don't even pay you all the time. We're going to take care of everything. And then they absorb all the sponsorships and run everything. And that's, these guys aren't employees. They're it's not the league, because they're not a league. It's one promoter. You have to have multiple promoters in order for it to be a league. It's one entity dictating uniform. That sounds like an employee.
Wow. So there was a situation before where, if you wanted Muscle Milk wanted to give you 100 grand, that would go right to you. But at the end, just to even get on the starting spot was 100 grand, not even to you.
Yes.
Wow. That is like crazy.
And they famously got in between a lot. Anybody who got a big sponsor on the outside, like UFC swooped in and got in between them and took it. Mighty Mouse had an Xbox sponsorship, I think. And who else was it? Somebody
Jon
else
Jones had Nike. Remember that?
Yeah, but there was one of those things where they only had Jon Jones didn't have Nike. Nike had Jon Jones through the UFC. Nike cut a deal with the UFC, and they allowed Nike to use Jon Jones, and they kept the majority of the money, and they gave Jon Jones a little bit.
Got it. Even though it looked like he was freaking decked out in the swoosh logo.
They give him that stuff, but that's probably all he got. He probably got the shit money, and then he got some free gear.
And so when you look at like what the World Series of Fighting is doing, or even Bellator or ONE FC, do you see like hope and promise for the future? And like what's standing out there?
They're not competing. Nobody's competing. Everybody's doing their own pro wrestling event. Nobody's trying to compete with anybody else. Everybody's satisfied with the fact that UFC is number one, and that Bellator is going to take the castaways, and everybody else is trying to set them up as a position to be a feeder to the UFC. Like
even one?
Even one is not trying to compete with the UFC. You have one, like my honest opinion, one's just laundering money. They're not trying to compete with anybody. they're just washing money.
No shit. Damn. And so they're not, because like once you declare war in the UFC, they're just relentless and they'll go after you and start holding events in the same weekend, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're like the first guys ever in like sports history to counter, what do you call it? Counter program.
Wow.
So when like Pride used to have events, they would put on an event to counter it. Like nobody ever used to do that.
So they're not even like promoting the sport. They're like de-promoting the sport in a way.
Yeah, because they don't want you to watch anybody else's stuff.
Crazy, because you got to think UFC had a lot to do with the rise of MMA, but at the same time, it's such a love-hate relationship.
There's a lot of BS along the story of UFC saving the sport. They had more to do with bankrupting and invalidating the original UFC than the original UFC had to do with like failing.
You mean pre-Zuffa?
Yes.
That was a whole different group of guys, right?
Yeah. It's like SCG, I think, UFC. Those guys, they're the ones who created the sport. They're the ones who push things towards sport. They're the ones who pushed the commission and the rule changes and everything set up. They're the ones that first brought everything packaged together to the commission to vote on legalization. Like they had it all set, ready to go. Once Nevada's commission would have legalized it, it would have been great. They would have been able to do shows once a month, every weekend, whatever. They would have had legal way to do that in California or in Nevada. But it got voted no. Nobody could understand why. Okay. But then you understand that one of the people on the athletic commission quit the athletic commission, turned around with his brother and bought the defunded UFC.
No, the Fertittas?
Yes.
Oh.
So on the verge of the UFC breaking through and things changing and going towards a profitable, awesome scenario, like the Fertittas said no, they blocked it, and then they turned around and made a move to buy it.
That's the kind of shrewdness is involved in this.
Okay. And there's more to it than that, right? Because the Fertittas' dad, right, built casinos in Nevada, in Vegas. He's really good friends with Harry Reid. You know who Harry Reid is?
Mm-mm.
He's the senator of Nevada.
Okay.
Okay. Harry Reid is also really good friends with John McCain.
Okay.
Okay. And John
McCain was
anti-MMA. He was pushing he was pushing the Ali Act. He was pushing MMA for the Ali Act, but at a certain point he dropped the attacks on MMA.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, he was like the reason.
There's a lot of weird things that went on behind the scenes behind Fertittas, their father, Harry Reid, and John McCain. And I think they even had something to do with the pay-per-view and getting them off of pay-per-view. I think they fully put the chokehold on Zuffa. The Fertittas put the chokehold on the original UFC and stole it. I don't think they saved shit.
Dude, the crazy thing is that you probably are right with like the connections and how far it goes with the McCains and that old money and like, dude, that's insane. Wow. I mean, we've all heard the story that Ben Askren told on Joe Rogan about how they, royally screwed him over, had him, leave Bellator, and then they didn't sign him. And then he was left in the cold and they wouldn't even take a meeting with him, so we've all heard that.
Yeah.
Wow. And, your story with him is, you were the number 2 fighter in the world for, 5, 6, 7, 8 years behind GSP. You battled him and you took a single loss and you were dropped. And then you went on to have, another successful career with World Series of Fighting in Bellator.
I had a great fight with GSP, fight of the night. And, I got fired after that because we had the video game dispute because they wanted my rights for life for no money. And I said no. And they used me as an example to scare everybody else into signing.
And how many fights had you had in the UFC before the GSP fight, just for context?
Well, GSP fight was my 9th UFC fight. I won 8, and then I lost to GSP, and then I won the next 5.
Wow.
I won 5 more after that. And I was supposed to get another title shot after I beat Thiago Alves the second time, which was one of my best performances. And after that fight, they took it away. They did, I didn't finish him, or they wanted him to win, or whatever. They were mad at me. And I talked back at the press conference too about them trying to get me to fight Koscheck. So I wasn't a company guy. They were mad at me. So instead of giving me the title shot, they took it away and then set me up to fight BJ in Australia. And then I think I got jobbed on that one too, because I think I smashed him. They probably should have stopped the fight in the 3rd. And yeah, it was a draw. And then I had to get some shoulder injury stuff taken care of. They passed me over the title shot, and I ran back too soon, out of shape. Looked terrible because I had an injury going into the fight, but I needed the money.
Yeah.
Lost to Hendricks.
And when did the video game situation come into play, and what all happened there?
That was 2008.
So they wanted your rights for life with no kind of payment.
No payment, no compensation.
So you said no, basically, and you were left out of the game, but they put you in anyways.
No, I ended up having to get put in because they orchestrated the whole thing. They knew what they were doing. Because they went to the press, right? So I wasn't going to sign it. I woke up one morning and then my name's in the paper and people are, making comments. So they ran with the story in the morning. Jon Fitch has been released from his UFC contract for not signing his video game agreement. And there's a big speech about, we need these guys to be on board. We need to be on our team, whatever bullshit. I was okay with saying, screw you. I'll go fight in Bellator, not Bellator, but it was Strikeforce at the time. There's plenty of fighters there at the time. They could have paid comparable, could have fought for a title there. Might've had an easier chance fighting for a title for them rather than keep trying to ask for one from the UFC. So I was fine with it. But then when they didn't scare me quick enough into coming back, then they started, they fired another one, not fired, but they terminated another one of my teammates' contracts, Christian Wallace, because he was coming off a loss. And then they said they're going to cut everybody from our gym and our manager's company as they lost. And they were nobody from our teams or our management company or our team, AKA, was going to ever fight in UFC ever again. They put that on me. And then we had a bunch of, Kane's training in the gym.
This is all the Zinkin guys?
We had all the Zinkin guys, yeah. So DC, Rockhold, Khabib, all those guys came through, AKA, and I would have been on my shoulders, I guess, that they wouldn't have fought. They're full of shit, and I should have known they're full of shit, and I shouldn't have listened to them, and I should have just went with what my original thought was, and I should have just fought with Strikeforce. But yeah, I made the choice to just stay put.
Oh, this sounds like the actions of a criminal mafia group, what they do, extortion.
They are, bro. They're monopolistic. Man, when you create monopolies are inherently evil, right? When you have one person with all the power, one group with all the power, everybody else has to take it or leave it. That never generally works out well for everybody.
Right. So what are the next steps with the case as we close the loop on that?
We are waiting with the class action lawsuit. We're waiting on our decision from the judge, a written decision on class certification. He has so much as said that we're getting class certification for the bout class, not the merchandise class or the royal, whatever I can't remember what the other class was, but which is confusing to me because I don't see how you can have one without the other. But we're waiting on that, and then they will appeal that decision. And then I'm sure that we will win the appeal, and then it'll be time for court. But I don't know if that's going to take a year or 5 years, or you don't know how long this court stuff. It's just ridiculous.
They could drain you guys legally easy, right? I mean, just continually push it out and use all their resources.
Well, and that's the idea is they're trying to just keep making, because they have a money printing machine right now, and they're just keep printing money. The longer they postpone things, the more money they can make on the back end. Eventually, maybe even turning the cost over into investors, because they're doing they're going public, or they have gone public.
Wow.
So they may turn the cost over into the investors. But one really good thing that has come from this so far is that they started putting in sunset clauses in their contracts. So you have 5 years, you sign a contract with them, you'll have 5 years until it terminates, regardless if you fought your fights or not. Like GSP is still in a contract because he never had a sunset clause. Well, now we've pressured them enough. They've tried to make enough changes so they can't keep getting sued, but I don't think it's big enough a change. But a championship clause can be utilized by fighters if they plan right. So like you sign that contract 5 years after your first fight with them, your promotional agreement's over. So if you fight once a year, or you time that contract to like you're close to a title and you win a title, you can fight once a year until you're close to that termination point and sit out until the termination point, and then you're a free agent.
Bro, these contracts sounds like 1930s boxing contracts where like you're signing over lifetime earnings type deal.
It's man, like
I had no idea.
You're contracted into like, it's just the way they do it, man. It's like they can terminate your contract pretty much whenever they want to, but you can never leave. Like they own you. Like they have the championship clause stuff. You have a title, you have to defend it. If you get injured and you can't take a fight, they put extensions on your contracts. Like there's a lot of.
Look what's happening to Francis. I mean, he was the golden boy. Now he hasn't even been a year, or I don't think it's been a year. Yeah, not even a year, and he's already
You push back a little bit. He's right. He could leave the sport of MMA right now today, take one boxing fight, and make 10 times more money in that one boxing fight than he'll ever make in MMA. He's not wrong. He would. He could easily drop out. People will pay to see it. He'll make $15-20 million.
Yeah.
To like straight up to show. Like
look at Jake Paul and Woodley. I mean, the dude got a tattoo of another man so we can get a rematch. It's like crazy.
I'll pay $65 to watch him fight Wilder. I don't care.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. Well, I'm glad you're out there illuminating some of these topics, because a lot of times, these things you don't even hear about. And before
you can't, because when you have that monopoly, like you have a monopolistic system, like the reporters, they don't cover it. If they cover what's going on, they cover the BS. They don't get the interviews anymore. The emails from the promoter goes out to the managers not to let your guys talk to certain people anymore.
And then ESPN's a news company, but they're involved in ownership. It's like the news is supposed to be unbiased.
It's all PR. It's all fluff.
Right. Damn.
It's no different than watching like the president's press secretary.
Right.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing.
They're going to do the same fluff. It's the same.
Well, we have just a few minutes left, Jon. I have a couple questions from the audience. Rapid fire we'll hit on. Jon, just the depth of your career, 19 years in MMA, you've fought and, trained for GSP, but you've also coached the great Khabib. How do you compare and contrast those two legends?
Oh, man. Khabib is just in your face. He's going to come and maul you. He's going to come forward and just pressure you and keep coming and keep putting pressure on you. No matter how many times you fight him off and get back up or whatever, he just keeps coming forward. It's kind of like a zombie bear attack. And GSP is like all about timing. He's got great timing. He's very fast, very explosive. So like he's able to make you freeze, make you misstep, make you not see him. And he's able to get easy takedowns because he's able to get you off balance when he attacks.
And talk about the book you wrote on weight cutting and about the ego. How did those come about? Where can folks find those?
Yeah. Well, my Failing Upward Death by Ego is supposed to be the first in a series. I got a lot more writing to do with the other books. But I kept journals for about 17 years or more. I still have journals, but I'm not writing in them every day. Like back in the day, I was writing them almost every day, pretty much every day. So I shared some of that. There's some of my stuff from wrestling in college. And that was kind of like that when I made the decision to start working hard, like, I started using the journal to help categorize and log my workouts and hold myself accountable. So I share the journal with everybody and the stuff that I was thinking at that time. It's a little embarrassing, but like I think there's a lot of learning you can go and get through by seeing what other people were going through and going through at the time, seeing at the time. But then I share the journals, and then I write reflections kind of on everything that I was going through and thinking.
And I love your
I got a
blog
lot more
too.
of those to do. The weight cut book is my system for how I've been making weight like my whole career. My buddy Mo, he was at the last fight, last weight cut, and he's like, bro, you got to like write this down. I was like, because he's helped other guys cut weight. And he's like, I've never had anybody who like makes weight as easy as you do. It's like, you know exactly how much you're losing. Like when you're in the sauna, you get out, you're like, I bet that was a pound. Like he's like, you got to like write it down. And so I did. So I got that made that available for people.
And what are
Never
those?
miss weight again.
What are those both called?
Failing Upward, Death by Ego. And then the other one is the Weight Cut Bible.
And then last but not least, Mr. Fitch, could you please share a brief update on your podcast? I really think it's something special you're doing there.
Yeah, I have Jon Fitch Knows Nothing. It's Sunday nights, 7 p.m. On the left coast. And I have a wide range of topics I talk about. A lot of it's geared towards like self-improvement, a lot of masculinity and man stuff. And, I help people and I counsel people in how to be better asshole.
Say it again.
I counsel and help people in how to be a better asshole.
Why is that? How did that come about?
Because there's a lot of people who are told to be nice guys, and it's really unfulfilling, and they want a better life, and you have to be a little bit of an asshole if you want to have the life that you want to live.
What a great way to sign off. Jon Fitch, thank you so much for your time, my man. I appreciate it. Would love to have
Thanks
you
for
back on
having
at
us.
some point.
Awesome, man. Good talking to you.
Take care, brother. Thanks for listening to this episode of Wrestling Changed My Life. This episode was presented by QUANT Wrestling. QUANT provides detailed analytics on the great sport of wrestling. Download the QUANT app now in the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. The first 2 weeks are free, but if you use the discount code WCML, you'll get an additional 2 weeks free. That's QUANT, QUANT, available in both the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. QUANT Wrestling, a proud sponsor of Wrestling Changed My Life.